Welcome back. Our next speaker is Maya Gans. Maya is a data visualization engineer at Atorus Research. She is an experienced R and JavaScript developer who recently started applying those skills to the clinical trial space. After graduating from her master's in botany from University of Wyoming, Maya interned at RStudio, where she created a visual blog-based programming language called TidyBlocks, as well as co-authored a book, JavaScript for Data Science. Currently, Maya writes R packages and award-winning Shiny applications to create dynamic, custom data visualization and exploratory tools to aid in understanding complex data. Maya is also passionate about data science education and has given many talks and workshops about using and creating tools in R. Maya has prepared a recording for us today and is available to answer your questions on chat and via private messages. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya Gans.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Gans, and I am so excited to give my presentation today, which I've entitled #OnBrand, Creating and Documenting a Custom Design Kit in Shiny. So we're going to go over what a design kit is, but there's a lot of jargon around that. So design kit is within a design system. So I want to talk about that in larger scope, some advantages, the nitty-gritty of what to include and how to go about doing that, and then end off with some disadvantages and further reading, because this is really just the tip of the iceberg here. So what is a design system? A design system is a set of rules, constraints, and principles implemented in design and code. And I think this is best illustrated with an example. So let's look at the example of color. A rule for color could be that it has to pass a minimum color contrast ratio. So the color of the text on the background has to be some mathematical value that it's super visible. A constraint is the number of colors in your company color palette. You can't just use any hue of blue. This is the blue that my brand, my company uses, and that is what we're going to stick with. And lastly, color should be used in a meaningful way. Don't just willy-nilly use different colors. Digging in further to an example, this color example is an error message on my own website. So you'll see here that the background color and the text color are significantly different in shade so that you can read that message. The color itself is this more maroon color that I've decided to go with, as opposed to say like a fire engine red. This is my red. And why did I use red? Red is super eye-catching, attention-grabbing on a website to show that, yes, there is an error here. The website user needs to acknowledge that. So a design system is a set of these principles that we can use within our design kit, which is a set of components, and then we can take that kit and use it within page layouts. So the font you use, the color you use, how much spacing around text, how much spacing between components, that should all be laid out in your design system so that we can create these components and finally layouts. Another kind of visual representation of this is that our design kit, which is the suite of components, has this button. I can use that button within a kind of like, let's think about like Shiny module of like, let's say I have a histogram and some button that says re-render the histogram. And I want to reuse that histogram on a bunch of different pages on my website, but it's a histogram and a button. And then here I can put those both, insert that into the page layout. So it's this set of interrelated, but they're all independent parts that we can reuse and recycle. So again, design kit, a collection of assets that contains a set of design elements such as UI components and styles. Why should I do this? 3 kind of advantages that I could think of were, if you have a button ready to go, then as a developer, when someone says, can you whip up this website real quick? I don't need to think about the styles and interactions of that button. I have it ready to go. So you can get prototypes up quickly. You have consistency. So in this presentation, I'm showing off my personal brand, but if you were to implement this in a large company or even small company, and you with multiple developers, once there's more than one person or even one person over time, you want to use the same styling across different departments, across different, maybe you want your portfolio to be styled the same as some other website that you created. And then lastly, mastery. I urge you to take the beginnings of this talk and run with it and hone your design skills. Start thinking about these things, be it in Figma or some kind of design software, or even with a pen and paper. Get after it. Okay, I'm still fuzzy. What is a design kit? Bootstrap is Twitter's CSS framework that Shiny actually uses. So you can say you don't know what a design kit is, but you're already using one. One of the most notable parts of Bootstrap that you'll know as a Shiny developer is that layouts are always divisible by 12. So you can create 2 columns of 6, yada, yada. So Bootstrap is the starting design kit, the foundation from what we're going to build upon and customize. Let's look at that even more concretely with an example of a button. So if you were to create an HTML button, and you do that in R by using the tags function and subsetting to a button, you get a gray button with black text and a dark gray outline, and this is maybe like a 15 pixel border radius. It's not a perfect square at the end. That is as opposed to Shiny's action button, which is a wrapper around this button, but with more CSS. So you get, now the button's white, this padding seems to have increased, this gray is lighter, this border radius is a little bit bigger, so it's a little rounder. But I want my own style, and kind of when thinking about the voice of my brand, it's playful and fun and pink. So I wanted to really exaggerate the border radius and make round buttons. And so what I did is my primary button is a button around the action button, and the action button is a wrapper around the HTML button. So we're going to be creating these wrappers around existing elements to create our design kit. I'm not going to go through this list. It's not exhaustive, but here is a checklist of things to go through when creating your design kit. Elements and reusable components that that will be useful when you're ready to build that website. You can just grab and go from this list. So without further ado, I want to hop into my personal design kit. And I also am a firm believer that if it's not documented, it doesn't exist. So here I have a connect page set up of my design kit, where I not only have the code needed for a developer to create that button, but I also have the output so a designer can look at these buttons. And what's cool about these buttons is even though they don't trigger anything, you can interact with them. What do I mean by this? A primary button needs the arguments of its ID and the text that you're going to put in that button. And when you do that, you not only see this button, but I can hover over it. And I can also click. And on click, you see that there's this ripple effect, and it's contingent on where my mouse hits it. So that's some custom JavaScript along with the custom CSS needed for this button. I also see this thick black line on hover, on focus. And then I also included a different state of the button, disabled. So the text is gray, the button's gray. And that cues to the user that they can't use this button. Similarly, I have a secondary button, which in the hierarchy of your page is less important than the primary button. So it has the same hover effect, but doesn't have that outline. I also included icon buttons because I wanted to show the user that all my icons are 24 pixels by 24 pixels, and they will all have a round border radius on hover. Again, I'm showing that disabled state. You want to show those different states, give a visual cue for what all your elements are going to look like. This one was really fun for me to build. It is a wrapper around Shiny's text input, and I want to urge you to think creatively. Again, this is thinking about those micro interactions. So on hover, the outline is now black, but what's really fun is if you click into the box, not only is the outline pink, but I also made the label pink. So now I know that I'm typing in the test field. And again, I have this disabled element and it shows, you can't type here type thing. The tab bar, this one was also really fun to build. I wanted to show my playful voice by when you hover over, it turns pink, the text turns pink. But what else is really fun is when you click on the active element, you'll see that the bar slides over to the active element. These are some really fun micro animations that you can use to give your website that voice, and that's uniquely you. Lastly, I included a tooltip example, which is just a wrapper around an existing icon button, and I'm using the Tippy library. And on hover, you'll see some text. And not only is the tooltip style taken into account here, but even just to show you more constraints, the timing, the delay, I set my delay to 2 seconds for when that pop-up shows up. So you want to be consistent in all your elements with whatever decisions that you make. And these wrapper functions help you to do that. So with that, we can now get into kind of a nitty-gritty of how did I implement this. And again, I'm going to share all my code for that design kit as well as the HTML for it after this talk. But what this function tag list allows you to do is create these shiny elements and also ship with it the CSS and JavaScript files all in a bundle for you ready to go. So what you do is you'll create that element, like here, I take that action button, let's say, and then I pipe in this new class, Maya's button. Then I create this dependency, which I attach the JavaScript, and the file will be Maya's button and CSS, both inside the ints folder, which is in my root directory. And again, I think this will be easier for you to just get that hands-on exploration and play with it when I link the repo. So you can link the CSS called button CSS and JavaScript called button JavaScript, and the class is my button. And then you return both the R code that you want to return as well as those dependencies. So you get that all for free. And that way the user of your package doesn't have to also implement these files. They just get it all for free. Okay, what do I include in my CSS file? So CSS, I'm just going to go over quickly. In CSS, we call this entire clause a rule, where you have the selector. So you say this class, Maya's button, and then you give it rules of properties, which get values. So the property of background color is assigned to white, and we always separate a property and a value with a colon and end the statement in a semicolon. So that's how you style Maya's button. But we also have this element, this concept of pseudo elements. So not only do I want to style my button one way, but I want to style the button on hover, on focus, and when disabled. And you want to consider these 3 pseudo elements in your entire design kit for all of your components. So that's kind of why I laid that out in that way. I don't want to belabor this one too much. And again, it exists in the repository, but that ripple effect that I created, I did that so that you can play with code and get your hands dirty, seeing how you can also attach JavaScript to your elements. And that's how you create this this ripple effect. So I think I called it button.javascript.js, and that's in the ints folder. And you can see that that is attached to the button there. And now all my buttons get that ripple effect. So we talked a lot about why to use this, how to use this, and all of that, but I did want to briefly talk about some disadvantages. So when you're creating this suite of elements, it is time consuming. And if you create a new application that needs a new element, you're going to have to go through that process again. And especially when working with in a big company, this can require going through a lot of hurdles, because you might need to ask the manager to ask the designer if you can do this, and then you need the designer to mock it up, developer to actually code it, and then you can finally use it. In the same vein, it can be hard to customize this. So if you have a fringe application, you're just one developer on a team of 100 developers, and you're just trying to make this one thing work. I don't want every button to change. I just want this one button in this one instance. That can be really hard to adapt from the design kit. So that's something potentially to be wary of there. And then lastly, just as I put it in the pro, that this can spur a lot of creativity. If you're joining a team where a design kit already exists, you're gonna think within that subjective reality of that design kit. Your brain isn't a blank slate. So like as a Shiny developer, when trying to create these a unique voice for myself, it was actually really hard to break out of the bootstrap mold, because all I can see was that gray left aligned well panel that we all know and love from like the Geyser application, that you get started with when creating your first Shiny app. So trying to break free from that is really hard, but I urge you to do so. And then the last thing is, I did want to mention that this covered a ton of ground, but this is really, my goal here is just to get you excited. And this is just the beginning, right? So 3 books that I reference all the time are Outstanding User Interfaces with Shiny, where David Grandjean goes through really awesome and beautiful examples for how to customize your Shiny applications and the technical skills needed for that. John Cohn's JavaScript for R. If you have some cool ideas for these micro interactions but don't know how to implement them, learning JavaScript can be a great aid in that. And then how to implement JavaScript is really laid out in this book, with really beautiful examples. And then lastly, a book that I love looking at, it is so aesthetically pleasing, is Refactoring UI, because there are like side-by-side comparisons of seemingly small stylistic changes that you can make that make such a big change in how users interact with applications. And I urge you again to just think about the user experience, and you just want to bring users to light when using your web page. So with that, my name is Maya Gans, and I work at Atorus Research, so I can be reached there. I can also be reached on Twitter, and I am so excited for people to start their design journey. I would love to see what you come up with and how you implement these things. And if you have any questions, my email and Twitter DMs are always open. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and I hope you all have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Maya, for sharing this presentation with us. A really interesting topic, and I think a lot of teams and organizations will reach that point where the design system is something that will bring a lot of value to the way the organization and the teams that they perform and work, and the way the whole organization is also structured and how it performs. So definitely an interesting insights, also for myself. And now, given that we have 10 minutes until the end of this slot, I would like to invite you to do some one-on-one networking or networking in groups, and talk to each other, share the knowledge, share your experiences, and have all the benefits of being a part of the conference. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.